The courtroom was filled with murmurs and stifled laughter. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the young black teenager standing before him. His tone dripped with condescension. "You're telling me you're here to represent yourself? What is this, a school project?" he scoffed, shaking his head. The girl, Ava Carter, stood firm, her hands steady on the plaintiff's table. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but she knew exactly what was coming. Doubt, mockery, dismissal. Laughter rippled through the courtroom, a child playing lawyer. But as soon as she opened her mouth, everything changed. Her voice was steady, her arguments sharp. One by one, she tore through the prosecution's case with a mastery that left jaws hanging. Judge Harrison's smirk faded. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Little did he know, he was about to find out. Ava Carter had never been ordinary. Growing up in a small town in Illinois, she spent more time reading legal textbooks than watching TV. While other kids played outside, Ava was deep in case studies, fascinated by the power of the law. Raised by her grandmother, Evelyn, a retired librarian, Ava learned early that knowledge was power. Her brilliance remained hidden from most, until the day she overheard a woman crying in a grocery store. Ava watched as Linda Parker, a single mother, pleaded with the cashier, tears in her eyes. "My landlord is evicting me for no reason. I've paid my rent every month. He says I broke the lease, but I didn't." Ava's mind raced. This wasn't right. She approached cautiously. "Do you have your lease and payment records?" Linda hesitated. "Yes, but what does it matter? I can't afford a lawyer." Ava took a deep breath. "Let me help." Linda looked at her, skepticism in her eyes. "You're just a kid." Ava gave a small, confident smile. "I've been told that before." That evening, she sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, legal documents spread out in front of her. The moment she read through Linda's lease, her suspicions were confirmed. Something was wrong. Several clauses contradicted state housing laws. The landlord had inserted illegal terms, exploiting tenants who didn't know better. Ava's pulse quickened. She grabbed a notebook and began outlining her strategy. This wasn't just an unfair eviction. It was a violation of Linda's rights. She wrote a demand letter, carefully citing legal precedents, and typed it with precision. Every word mattered. If the landlord thought he could get away with this, he was about to be proven wrong. As she sealed the envelope, she exhaled deeply. This was her first real fight, but something told her it wouldn't be her last. And just like that, the battle began. For the next 2 weeks, Ava buried herself in paperwork, analyzing every detail of Linda's lease. She quickly found inconsistencies. The landlord's claims were built on lies. The more she read, the clearer it became. The eviction was not just unfair, it was illegal. She drafted a formal demand letter, citing housing laws and legal precedents that proved Linda had every right to stay. It was firm, professional, and left no room for misinterpretation. With trembling hands, Linda delivered it to her landlord. His response was swift. He crumpled the letter and laughed. "A letter from a kid? Cute," he scoffed. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Ava expected this. When he ignored the letter, she took the next step, filing a case in small claims court. Word spread quickly. A teenager taking on a powerful landlord. Some found it laughable. Others admired her boldness. Linda's neighbors whispered about the case, some cheering her on, others shaking their heads. The landlord, amused at first, soon realized that Ava wasn't backing down. That was when he hired an expensive attorney, but Ava had done her homework. On the morning of the hearing, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Spectators filled the seats, curious to see how this young girl would fare against a seasoned lawyer. The landlord sat confidently beside his attorney, arms crossed, smirking. Ava stepped forward in her simple navy blazer, her legal pad held tightly in her hands. Every eye in the room was on her. As soon as she introduced herself, Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Miss Carter, this is a real courtroom, not a school debate club." Laughter rippled through the room. Ava didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I take this case very seriously." Judge Harrison smirked. "Then by all means, entertain us." That was his first mistake. Taking a steady breath, Ava turned to face the courtroom. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and she was ready. The battle had officially begun. Taking a deep breath, Ava launched into her case. She methodically broke down the landlord's false claims, presenting email records that contradicted his statements. Then, she handed over a report from a housing law expert, proving that the eviction was illegal. The laughter stopped. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the landlord's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Judge Harrison's smirk faded as he leaned forward, suddenly interested. The once dismissive courtroom was now gripped with tension. Then came the final blow. Ava reached into her case file and pulled out a document sealed with an official state bar stamp. She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The room fell into silence as everyone watched. Judge Harrison's face turned pale. His hands trembled slightly as he read the document. His eyes darted back to Ava in disbelief. The courtroom held its breath. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up, his voice uncharacteristically soft. This says you passed the bar exam." Ava nodded. "That's correct, Your Honor. I'm a certified attorney." The courtroom erupted. Spectators whispered in disbelief. Some leaned forward in their seats, murmuring in astonishment. The landlord's lawyer looked ready to faint, while the landlord himself shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence evaporating. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, struggling to regain composure. "How old are you?" Ava met his gaze, her voice unwavering. 17. A wave of astonishment swept through the courtroom. The murmurs grew louder, reporters scrambling to jot down notes. Even the opposing lawyer glanced at Ava, with something bordering on respect. For the first time in his career, Judge Harrison was speechless. He straightened in his chair, nodding slowly. "Proceed, counselor." Ava's lips curled into the faintest smile. She turned back to the landlord's lawyer, confidence radiating from every movement. The tables had turned. What had started as a mockery had now become a trial no one would ever forget. And for the first time, the landlord looked afraid. As the shock settled, the landlord's lawyer scrambled for a counterattack. "Objection. We have reason to believe this evidence was falsified," he shouted, his voice edged with desperation. Judge Harrison turned to Ava, his eyes narrowed. "Miss Carter, do you have proof of your credentials?" Without hesitation, Ava pulled out additional documents: her bar certification, law school transcripts, and letters of recommendation from respected legal professionals. She handed them to the bailiff, who delivered them to the judge. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom as Judge Harrison flipped through the papers. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples before looking back at the landlord's lawyer. "Objection overruled. Miss Carter, please continue." Ava turned to the opposing counsel, her expression unwavering. "Do you have any legal arguments left?" Silence. The landlord, now visibly sweating, shot to his feet. "She's lying! This whole thing is a scam!" he shouted, pointing at Ava. His face was red with frustration, his confidence cracking under the weight of his unraveling case. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel, his voice booming through the courtroom. "Mr. Peterson, sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt." The landlord's mouth opened as if to argue, But something in the judge's expression stopped him. He collapsed back into his chair, fists clenched on the table. He knew he had lost. A tense hush filled the room as Judge Harrison prepared to deliver his verdict. His gaze swept across the courtroom before settling on Linda, who sat clutching her hands together in silent prayer. The eviction is ruled unlawful. The plaintiff may remain in her home, Judge Harrison announced firmly. Case dismissed. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a wave of emotion crashed through the courtroom. Linda burst into tears, turning to Ava and wrapping her arms around her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much." The spectators erupted into cheers. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, cameras flashing as Ava stood tall, her face calm, yet triumphant. The landlord slumped in his seat, defeated. His lawyer gathered his papers, avoiding eye contact with the crowd, now murmuring in disbelief at how the tables had turned. Ava exhaled, feeling the weight of victory settle over her. She had done it, and this was only the beginning. That day, Ava Carter became a legend. Her story made headlines across the nation. Teen prodigy attorney stuns courtroom. The media couldn't get enough of her, a 17-year-old who had not only passed the bar exam, but had single-handedly taken down a corrupt landlord. Interview requests flooded in, and her name became synonymous with justice. But Ava wasn't interested in fame. She had a bigger mission. With the support of lawyers who admired her courage, Ava launched a legal aid program dedicated to helping struggling families fight wrongful evictions. She spent her days balancing schoolwork with pro bono legal cases, ensuring no one would be left defenseless against injustice. Years later, she became one of the top civil rights attorneys in the country, known for her relentless pursuit of fairness and integrity. Judge Harrison? He never mocked another young lawyer again. In fact, he invited Ava back to his courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker to inspire future legal minds. And Linda? She kept her home, forever grateful to the girl who had changed her life. She later joined Ava's legal aid center, helping others the way she had once been helped. Ava Carter proved that intelligence has no age, and justice has no limits. If you were in that courtroom, what would your reaction be? Let us know in the comments. Type 1 if you admire Ava's bravery, or 2 if you were shocked by the judge's reaction.